Then obviously keep open costs in general, but then per appointment, what it costs us to run. Because then you can have more, when you have that data, you can have more pointed discussions around the method of billing, what's billed, the cost of other things like consumables, which would only add to that. Like there's all sorts of other.
Yeah. And also, Sachin, I often do that by keep open per hour, not per appointment. Because then you can say, oh, well, look, if a GP does an extra hour and they bill $200 per hour and I take 30% of that, but my costs are this. Does it actually make sense? That's actually a calculation that a lot of people miss sometimes.
Then that allows us to choose, using the data, what we focus on. And I think what I heard you say earlier is that even if you're comparing or just curious as to what other practices similar to you might be doing, you can then almost identify areas where you can employ the Pareto principle. Where are we wildly different to other practices? And where wildly higher, that might be a risk area. If we're wildly lower, that might be an opportunity area that might guide what data-driven business decisions we then make.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And it's also helps you with your limited amount of energy or your limited amount of focus. Do the things that move the needle the greatest, but just don't do always negative things. Do positive things as well. Celebrate those things, because that makes sometimes what makes your business super special. And it sometimes interests me, like we had a practice that did a huge amount of chronic disease management. And to a lot of people, they're like, oh, we're going to be above the parapet. And they're like, you know what? That's amazing. We do it well. Our team love it. We look after people. Let's do more.
Hey, welcome back today to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I'm here and joined by our favorite data junkie, Chris Smeed from Cubiko. Hey, Chris, welcome.
Mate, how many data junkies do you know? Like, that I'm the favorite. I'm more worried about who are these other ones getting around, that the other favorite data junkies that, No, I'm good. It is, I can't believe it's like this year is flying by. It's lots going on, but I'm really good and happy to be back here from the podcast.
Excellent. Welcome. Chris, we're going to jump straight into it. I think everybody in our industry knows you. If they don't, we'll put a brief bio in the show notes. I know
they don't. Yay for them. They've managed to escape it. So well done.
So, Chris, you are probably a preeminent authority in the industry around the data in general practice and the power of data in general practice. And I think a good place to start is, for many practices, it can be a struggle with data overwhelm. We've got all this information. How do we use it? How would you practice in that position? What do you reckon they should do?
That's an awesome question. And one I get a fair bit, and I know over the years, you and Todd have called me out on that a few times. And I think I always like to start by explaining that the general practice in Australia is amazing, because every practice is a little bit different. And what works for one practice won't work for another practice. And you might think you've got the exact same business model. You might have the same billing schedule. You might have a similar number of doctors. But I can guarantee you there's a different way that one doctor will have their appointment book, or a different way the nurses like to work, or a different vibe in reception. And that will all throw off your business. And I not throw off, but make your business unique is a better way to say it. So when people say, Chris, I'm overwhelmed, where do I start? I say to them, the best place to start these days is with our touchstone data set. So if you take Cubiko, and I'm going to talk about Cubiko today because that's what I know and love and where I sit in the world, we've got over 1,300 practices that have opted into our de-identified aggregated data set, which is huge. Hey, Sachin, like that is something, I think like a few years ago, you and I were talking about benchmarking. We would thought maybe 30 practices was a good benchmark. But the real power of it comes from being able to say, I am a bulk billing clinic in an MM3 in Queensland in this PHN, and I have registrars and I have 9 FTEs. So at least you can then sort of get back to something to compare to, and then say, well, where am I different? Where am I different? And you notice that I didn't say, where am I worse? I said, where am I different? Because I think one of the biggest mistakes people say is they'll focus in on the negatives. Oh, we've got a longer wait time. Oh, we bill less per hour. I'd say if you're starting with data in your practice and struggling to get data to adopt, don't start with a negative. Start with a positive. Start with a positive. Our over 75 get more of the over 75 health assessments completed than anyone else. We look after our over 75 so well. And what that does is it takes it away from being this businessy thing to about care of our patients. So yeah, I think overwhelmed, don't go for everything. Look where you're at. Look at some of those benchmarks and make sure those benchmarks resonate with you. If you Google general practice benchmarks, of the top 50 results, 25 of them are from a time before COVID. And I know everyone's practice is so different now to what it was before then. So that's something there's a bit. The other thing I'd say, and one of the things I love about what we do is nearly every metric that we build that reports on something, so it tells you something that's going on in your practice. And it might be billings per appointment, it might be unactioned recalls, things like that. We always try to pair it with a metric that lets you do something with it. So we have a metric, unactioned recalls. Really simple metric. I'm picking that one. And we showed it to a practice and they had, I think it was about 700 unactioned recalls. And they're like, Chris, you just made me feel bad. You just made me feel bad. And I'm like, I'm not the arsehole. I'm sorry. I didn't know to be the arsehole. But that's just what the data shows. But here's 3 projects or 3 ways you can do to improve that. And that's been data chooses from something that's overwhelming to actually something that's insightful and you can use it to do something with it. Because no one just wants to have another PDF report that you get on the email and you print it off and put it in a folder on the shelf. Do something with your data. Suddenly goes from being overwhelming to like, oh, you know what? We had 700. We're now at 400. Does the overwhelmingness drop? 400 is still a lot, but it's something you can control and do to make things better.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing 2 things. So just to be clear, the first one I think was quite profound. You've got now the ability, so with Cubiko, to compare using Touchstone across 1,300 practices. And the example you gave, you dug down into MM3, we've got registrars, etc. Can you drill down like that in the data?
Yeah. So we had an amazing practice in New South Wales for their last patient newsletter that just said, our wait time is 6 minutes. We know that in Sydney South PHN, in mixed billing practices with 6 full-time GPs that have registrars, the average billing wait time last month was 13 minutes. And the deal with Cubiko is, and I felt this was super important. So we've got over 2,300 practices using Cubiko. Only 1,300 opted into Touchstone because it's their choice to be involved in that de-identified aggregated data set. But once you opt in, you get to slice and dice and filter that data however you want. And I know when a lot of practices made the change from bulk billing to mixed billing, the first thing to do is rather than saying, we've just changed that filter. What's the average bulk billing in my area? What's the average mixed bill? So it's all in your control to play with and look at and compare, just so you can really get useful data out of it, not having to have someone else decide what is useful for you.
Absolutely. And then the second part I heard you say is, don't just measure stuff. Think of positive actions to then take on the back of things that you're measuring, rather than just measuring for measuring's sake.
Measuring for measuring's sake just makes everyone not like data. And you get this, I know you've heard me say this before, in general practice, you get this like pot of goodwill from your doctors and your nurses and your receptionists. And if you're just measuring something to bring everyone down, I don't think that's a great outcome for anyone. Who'd want to be around that every day? Life's too precious to want to go and be told that every day. Whereas we're measuring something and we might know it's not great, but actually we're using data to improve it. Or, you know what? We're not using data to improve it, we're using data to track what happened to make it better in our lives and our practice. Then people get involved and they care. And it's not you being the one data nerd in the practice banging on about it. I find that's practices that really get value out of their data, as opposed to the ones who will print off a report they get every month an email and be like, that's good. I'll put that over there. I'll put it in a folder. Great.
Shelf help. That's really useful as a way to get started then, just to see comparing apples with apples and then just getting an idea of, by looking at other similar practices, you might start to get some ideas of things that you're doing well, ideas for future projects as well. That's awesome. I suppose the next thing I think that would be useful to know is, at the end of the day, we're all here in general practice because we want to do good for patients. And then we want to do that in a sustainable way. So many practices might have blind spots or black holes financially. And I know you said before, you shouldn't just pick arbitrary numbers to track, but if you're advising, or from you and your team talking to practice owners, are there some key metrics that you think that practice owners should track, which might help them improve the efficiency of the way they bill, and where they might easily be able to pick up revenue that they've left on the table?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd always say, it kind of goes back to what I said before. If you don't want to use Touchstone, you don't want to compare things, at least start with a budget or a goal or a target. I know, and if you look at gross billings, I know there's service fees and everything like that, but look at gross billings. I know when the practice bills $22,000 a week gross, we've got all our fixed costs covered. Everything after that is profit or reinvesting in the business. It amazes me the number of practices that don't know that number. I used to say, to me, it was that barometer of, do I get a cheap bottle of red or a good bottle of red on the way home on Friday night? But when you know that number, what it does is it frames so much decision making around, oh, cool, this is where we're at. We've had a great week. This is what we're focusing on. This is what we're doing. This is what we can afford to put time into, or this is what we need to work on. So having a budget, working with your accountant or your financial advisor or your coach or mentor, just to know that budget, and don't go crazy with like 3 different variation forecasts of trend lines. And I know I'm the data guy and should love that. Just know our gross billings each week need to be 52,000 for us to be comfortable. That's the baseline. Once you get past that, you then start to basically need to understand your team. And I'm going to start with GPs today. And one of the most important metrics that I like to look at is revenue per hour. And we're talking there as billings per hour. So not revenue after the splits, but billings per hour. And the reason I say billings per hour, and I know for a long time, everyone loved looking at billings per appointment, or some people call it billings per encounter, is I learned in general practice. Can someone explain to me what a standard appointment is in general practice? Like, what is a standard appointment? Was it a script? Was it this? What is it that? In March, when it's in April, it's going to be flu season. So suddenly they're all short appointments, things like that. And everyone was getting so obsessed with billings per appointment. I'm like, but explain. How can I compare that across my even like 3 doctors with my practice? Some will run 20-minute diaries. Some will run 10-minute diaries. Some will always just run late. Some will always run early. Some will do a lot of nursing home visits on Wednesday on the way home. So we use revenue per hour. So we take it back to that number that you can use to compare across your practice, but then also across your cohort using Touchstone, using the same maths across everywhere. I kind of hate using the word compare because suddenly compare implies good or bad. But to your point, Sachin, if you don't know where to start looking or what to start working on, if you've got a doctor who's billing double the revenue per hour as everyone else practice, and these are the silly made up examples, would you be worried about having a session with them, encouraging them to bill more? Probably not. You're probably doing a session to make sure that everything's in line with the code and under shared debt recovery, everything's happening on that front. So I love to look at that billings per hour on a y-axis. And if you go to our website, we've got a blog article on this, and then appointments per hour on the x-axis. And map each doctor with a dot. And then you can quickly find out who is doing a high billing number per hour, but not seeing very many patients. And how can we help them to say, you see some more patients to help throughput in your clinic? Or maybe they don't want to see more patients. But often we find that they're doctors or providers who don't utilize their nurse team within their practice because they do it all themselves. On the flip side, you might have a practice seeing a lot of patients, but not billing very much per hour. Sachin, who do you think they might be? The ones who are seeing lots of patients and not billing very much per hour?
Who would they be? They'll be like people who see a lot of children. So maybe they're bulk billing and seeing
high bulk billers in your practice. There's normally a correlation. Like they're just getting the bulk billing and then plus the incentive if it's eligible. So they're burning through themselves on that front. What can you do? The other people we find they're often are registrars. They'll book everything as a 23. So pairing them with a senior doctor to help them understand the schedule and how to have conversations with patients when you privately or mix bill them can be super powerful. And the reason I started with that was Sachin is it amazes me the number of practices that start with Cubiko and look at that for the first time. And I know this goes back to a lot of what the culture of Scale My Clinic talks about, is often the squeaky wheel was the one that you gave a lot of time and effort to. But when you see where they sit on that graph, it might not be where you expected it. And it really leads to conversations that are not just about the money and the finances of practice, but the culture of our practice. If you've got everyone sitting in the top right quadrant and one person in the top left quadrant, and they're your squeaky wheel, do you think they match the culture of your practice? I know there's lots of other parts of culture, but I can tell you 9 times out of 10 when I talk to someone or a practice owner in that situation, they're the squeaky wheel. They don't quite match. They maybe got them because they were desperate for a doctor, but they've never kind of fitted in. They'll have problems because they work differently than everyone else in the team. And that's where your opportunity comes from, not having a conversation around, and this is just me. I found conversations around emotion or a feeling about something quite hard. Whereas a conversation that says, this is where everyone is on the data and this is where you are, there's no emotion. I'm not making a judgment. I'm just showing you where you are in the data. That can be really powerful too there. So that's what I use with my doctor team. I'd never open a conversation with practitioners on that because they will just say, you're all about the money, you're all about the throughput. This is not where I want to work. So I'd always pair that with measures of clinical opportunity or awesome things like that, like quality improvement, or we've now built CPD into Cubiko. So they can be doing their CPD while doing their hours. So that's a huge one there for them as well. So finding that balance there. Finally, I'd take data from your profit and loss and actually know on the back of your head, I don't know what the saying is there. What does it cost to run an appointment in this practice? For every hour a doctor's seeing patients in our practice, what does it cost to run? And on average, what do we earn? Because that's taking into account things after the service fee then, back to your business of being a general practice. And I know I'll get in trouble for payroll tax and using the wrong words there, but you get what I'm saying. You need to know what it costs to run that business to be sustainable there. And then once you know that, you can have empowered conversations. You can have conversations that are backed with data. And then you can look at your data and say, okay, we're at this situation, we have this, but we also have 1,100 patients who are overdue their care plan. So at the moment, it costs us $3.40 per appointment to run our practice. These are made up numbers. If we add an extra full-time nurse, the billings that nurse could generate are X. The payroll cost will be Y. But the most important thing, how good would that be for our patient outcomes? How good would that be offering that care to our patients? So it's balancing those things. I'm rambling now, but they're sort of the ones that I definitely like. When a practice I meet for the first time just got Cubiko, that's where I'll ask the questions to start.
Absolutely. What I'm hearing is getting clear on keep open costs, because then the bare minimum you need to be performing at. And you could include in your keep open costs a minimum profit that you would accept, right? But keep open doesn't just mean break even. Your definition of break even may be a minimum profit of 6 figures or whatever number is decided.
What makes it worthwhile for you to carry that risk is huge.
Then obviously keep open costs in general, but then per appointment, what it costs us to run, because then you can have more, when you have that data, you can have more pointed discussions around the method of billing, what's billed, the cost of other things like consumables, which would only add to that. Like there's all sorts of other.
Yeah. And also, Sachin, I often do that by keep open per hour, not per appointment. Because then you can say, oh, well, look, if a GP does an extra hour and they bill $200 per hour and I take 30% of that, but my costs are this. Does it actually make sense? That's actually a calculation that a lot of people miss sometimes.
And so then that allows us to then choose, using the data, what we focus on. And I think what I heard you say earlier is that even if you're comparing or just curious as to what other practices similar to you might be doing, you can then almost identify areas where you can employ the Pareto principle. Where are we wildly different to other practices? And where wildly higher, that might be a risk area. If we're wildly lower, that might be an opportunity area that might guide what data-driven business decisions we then make. Is that?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And it helps you with your limited amount of energy or your limited amount of focus. Do the things that move the needle the greatest, but just don't do always negative things. Do positive things as well. Celebrate those things, because that makes sometimes what makes your business super special. And it sometimes interests me, like we had a practice that did a huge amount of chronic disease management. And to a lot of people, they're like, oh, we're going to be above the parapet. And they're like, you know what? That's amazing. We do it well. Our team love it. We look after people. Let's do more. Just because you're different doesn't mean it's bad, but it needs to match up with what your agreed culture and your agreed strategy is in your business. If you said your strategy was not to do any CDM and you're doing more CDM than anyone else, then I'd say, oh, there's something not quite right here. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's you get to peek through the Johari window. You don't know what you don't know, and data starts to reduce the size of the bits that you don't know or are unaware of. And then once you're aware of something, you can make an active choice or decision about which part of that you focus on. All right, so that's awesome. And you've given really good starters as to how we might go about deploying data in the practice. What about using data to reduce admin burden or the time that admins spend on what they do? Maybe using data to automate processes or to delegate. Have you got any insights into that?
Yeah, look, that's something we're starting to look at more and more as our product matures. I saw that 5th birthday last year, and I know that as a product, we moved much more from, as you said, Sachin, reporting area to enabling area. And we're growing, we're doing more and more. I think one of the biggest things that we've done is probably less focused on admin burden, but more focusing about, and this I think comes back to my philosophy around general practice. How do we get everyone going the same direction? Because that's often one of the biggest things to solve, because once everyone's going in the same direction, you get some energy. So one of the biggest things we've done over the last 12 months, and I've just loved working with practices on, is that you can now do a practice quality improvement that your doctor at the same time can do a measure and outcome CPD, and you're doing it for your QI, and you're doing it for your incentives all at the same time. I know that sounds like a lot, but let me just break it down to one I love, is that we worked with a practice, and we got a lot of them now actually, that said, great, we want to improve our over 75 health assessments. And I like saying that one because the clinical criteria is a lot less for that one. So it's a little less intimidating to start with. So as a practice, we're going to do a quality improvement. So you need that for your PIT QI. You need it for accreditation. And they're going to do it about getting that number of over 75 health assessments. And what we do in Cubiko is we say, here's where you are. You set your goal, but then here's 3 metrics to help you get there. And it might be just that we can now write back to each patient coming in today, this patient may be eligible for over 75 health assessment, into appointment notes. So your receptionist can see it when they come through, or the nurse can see it. But then what I love is that the doctors, clinical autonomy, could then choose to do a CPD measuring outcomes around the number of their patients who are eligible for over 75 health assessments who haven't had them. And then suddenly they're working on that as well. And the nurse is working on it as part of the practice quality improvement. And you know what that makes? Conversations in the tea room or in your Slack or Teams, whatever you use, about running this way and I'm running this way and I'm running this way. But what about when everyone's running the same way? And it's like, oh, we actually don't need this form because this person does it really well as part of this workflow. Or I learned this, or I heard this. And you're not having switching between 6 different things. Everyone's just excited about the one thing, but that one thing helps your patients. And that's another reason they go back to over 75s, because I don't know about you, but in our practice, the over 75s were the ones who always came the earliest and had the longest chats with us in reception. So you could always say, oh, Betty, and everyone knew Betty because Betty would come early and it meant something to the team. So that's a great example of like quite a bigger thing. In terms of smaller things, one of the best things we see is in Cubiko, we know a lot of people have full diaries. So we'll look at your diary and rate the likelihood of a patient not turning up for their appointment. And if you have to double book, and I know we hate it, but if you have to double book, you know how much more a GP or a nurse appreciates it, or an allied health provider appreciates it. If, as the reception team member, you say, look, I'm sorry we had to double book this in. I've booked it into the slot that the patient has a higher chance of not showing up. Is that a much better conversation? Does that show care and feeling and thought about what's going on? That's huge on that one too. The final one, Sachin, that we're seeing a lot of movement in is building custom dashboards about how your business works and about how your role is important. So I know in a lot of practices now, there might be a member of the reception team who is charged as the person who's responsible for recalls and remind, rather than being everyone's responsibility. At the end of the day, that's this person's reminder. So we've got data and metrics on recalls and reminders. They can make a custom dashboard that just shows the 3 things for recalls and reminders. And you sort of questioned before about overwhelmness. You're not overwhelmed. They're the 3 things you need to focus in on. Or we have one about DNAs, or we have one about debt. And building dashboards to focus in on what you're working on as a business. And I guess what we've talked about along the first part of the podcast here about choosing what to focus in on, but then choosing the metrics and getting rid of the noise to say, here's your dashboard just on debt, 4 metrics on debt. And in Cubiko, that's their dashboard. And the really cool thing is, I've actually had a lot of this with Scale My Clinic practices, is that if you build an awesome debt dashboard, you can actually share that with another practice. You share the link with the other practice. And when that practice opens up the dashboard, they see the exact same layout, wording, everything, but they see their data in it. And how cool is that? Because then people are collaborating cross practice, or even within the same practice. As a nurse, I can build a diabetes dashboard and share that with my other nurses. So when they click on that, they get just what's important. So we're definitely finding that as there's a lot of tools popping up in the market, there's a lot of things happening, there's a lot of disruption. A, to your point before, if you don't measure it, how do you know you got it better? But B, actually it can sometimes be about empowering people who you give these projects or these tools or their journeys to track the outcome, and not everything, just super important things. And that's what we've been finding is our role in this space as sort of so much new tech arrives.
Absolutely. Again, just a couple of things I want to pick up on, because I think it's just to clarify as well. So what you talked about is it's possible to have a QI activity, quality improvement activity at a practice level, which is an accreditation and PIP requirement. And you can align that with an activity at a doctor level, which the doctor is then able to get CPD hours for measuring outcomes. And so that can be harnessed together. And then obviously some of the incentives are aligned to that as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And just great for patients.
Yeah.
These are things that are great for the patients that we care about.
That's really cool. And then something I heard, but I think it's worth again just clarifying. You said we can write back to appointment notes for patients in best practice. So can you just speak to that?
Mate, brand new. We launched this 2 weeks ago. It's called Care Prompts. So it might be something that people haven't heard of. So we've done some awesome work over the last 5 years in Cubiko, being able to identify both clinical and business and billing opportunities to engage with our patients that still need a clinical review, still need the decision by the provider to make the decision. But I don't know, you've challenged me this on the once or twice, Sachin. It's like, things are busy. I don't need another screen or another pop-up. I'm in my PMS, things going on. So we worked with the awesome crew over at BP. And what happens is those item optimization sheets that we know a lot of practices might be printing off or using our sidebar, you can now send that back to the appointment notes section and a few other places in BP. So it'll show on the waiting room book, it'll show on the diary book, Cubiko, and whatever the opportunities are. One of the things I want to be really clear on this though, is that we're not going to send back 50 opportunities. As a practice, you choose, even down to the individual doctor on the individual day level, about what prompts you want to go back. So we're not going to send all 50 things. You might say this month, we just follow the next 3 months, we're just focusing on patients who haven't had their GPMP TCAs up to date with the changes that are coming. And you can choose just to send those prompts back to the diary, but then you might have a doctor who doesn't want to know those prompts. So you could not include them. But then you might have a doctor say, I want to know that, but I also want to know anyone who hasn't had their flu backs. So you can do different prompts for different doctors. And then the really cool thing is also works for nurses who they might have in their diary. So you don't have to have people to log in, do things like that. You can just send all those prompts back to the best practice. So they're there when you look at your waiting room or your appointment book. So super simple and super easy. So it's been a huge feature we've rolled out over the last 2 weeks and a lot of awesome feedback from practices.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to labor the point. I just want to make sure I've understood it right. I've got a column of say 30 patients for the day. I can choose in Cubiko, search as an example, search for, if there's 3 of us as doctors, but only 2 of us want to be involved, we can instruct in Cubiko, search for GPMP and TCAs that are due. Cubiko will do the search and then you can press something that then in my appointment, I'm just in BP, but it comes up with maybe eligible for.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you have an integration to Proto, it'll also say we've checked it in Proto or not too. Time saver there as well. It's a big bit of tech we've been working on for the last year to help make life easier. It's been amazing. Like practices have come to us and said, our doctors about Cubiko. And now each day they get these prompts from Cubiko. They want to know more about Cubiko and how they can use their data more. But you know what? They don't need another password and a login and a thing to go and to do this. They get to focus on looking after patients. And also, hopefully their billings goes there as well.
Yeah. So essentially, it's even checked if they're eligible with Medicare if you've got the Proda integration. And so if it's there, then it pretty much means they're probably eligible if the doctor deems it clinically appropriate.
Exactly.
And then can take the appropriate next steps. That's excellent. I often talk about, some people get worried about opportunistic care, but the one that something sticks out for me, my wife's uncle during the pandemic, he had diabetes and hypertension, etc. But the pandemic, this is not here, but it's over because of remote care in that practice in that country, they weren't really doing outreach or any opportunistic stuff. So he stopped taking his antihypertensives and then had a massive hemorrhagic stroke and has lost a significant amount of quality of life later in life. And so I'm a big fan of opportunistic work. And so this type of thing would facilitate opportunistic work, because sometimes it's hard to keep it all in your head when you're dealing with what they've come with. But that prompt could actually then allow a clinician to say, hey, we're due to review this. Let's get you booked in for when you next come. Even if they're not going to do it there and then, at least they pulled them back into the care cycle.
And also a lot of the systems that we had in our practices pre-COVID, like our nurse managed this, our nurse was across this, our receptionist rebooked this. With telehealth, they've gone, they've disappeared. So you need to actually be having it at multiple points so you can enact it, not relying on someone being picked up in the waiting room for this. And so it's been pretty amazing. And the thing I think is just so super important is that as a practice though, or as an individual practitioner, between the owner and the practice manager and the practitioner or the nurse or whoever is going to be involved in your practice, you actually agree what you want to know. Like, what is it that I want to know? And if someone says to me, just give me all of it, I'd challenge them. I'd say, if you do that, I reckon by the third patient, you're not going to bother reading because it's just fatigue. And so that was a huge importance to us as a team when we started building this feature, was that ability to choose and I hate choosing what's important because it's all important, but choose what matters to you at that point of time in your practice. There's no point sending flu vax reminders in November. Like things, there's stuff like that. But there's also things saying, oh, look, we don't have a nurse the next 2 weeks. So why would we put prompts for over 75 health assessments or care plans for the next 2 weeks? It's just going to be a whole lot of like, oh, I can't do this. Like it's contextualizing it to what's important to your practice and your business and the way you work. It's super, super important. Otherwise it just becomes noise. And noise is just not fun.
Absolutely. So I think in my head, I'm already forming a triangle of data, context, and collaboration. And then, and that's a constant cycle that you to be working on in that setting.
Yeah, because we're so excited. I just think it's so powerful in what we do.
And then you drop so much gold, but for you, it's like, oh yeah, we're just doing this and we're just doing that. But I just want to make sure I've picked up on the pieces, because the other thing I heard you say is some sort of predictive stuff around. So how does that work?
Yeah, look, patients are actually creatures of habit. We know that if Bill has a history of not showing up, there's a high chance Bill's not going to show up. We also know our reception teams are extremely busy trying to get everything. And as much as you use reminders and text messages and phone and things like that, sometimes we need to pick up a phone and call the 10 people out and confirm their appointment the day. So this metric started by saying, what's the order we should call those 10 people in? We should call the one who has the highest chance of not showing up first. And that started. And then we quickly found out that practices then use that as a way to work out if they have to double book, that's the spot to double book it into, because that's the highest chance of that practice patient not showing up. So, it's not AI. It's not anything wacky. It's just good old fashioned maths and probability and things like that. That gives really good results. So we have a lot of practices now that put that one metric, patient's DNA history and chance of not showing up, on a single page, make it a custom dashboard in Cubiko, and each morning the receptionist gets to open that one dashboard and see that one metric. And for them, that makes their world easier. And that's a win. That's awesome. Yeah, it's just a great win. And it helps get access to care when we really need it for our patients.
That's awesome. And then my last question to you is, because you talked about how different practices are using the data. Have you had any examples? And you may not have any, but it's just interesting, just while I've got you to ask. One of the things that works sometimes quite well with data is gamification, like where people have some type of competition or some fun around it. Have you got any examples where people have done that?
Yeah, mate. I think one of the bits I love is all our PIT QI and quality improvement lets you set a goal or a target and tracks your progress towards that goal or a target. So we actually started doing it during COVID when we were trying to let practices track their vaccination rate. And it was literally, if we get to 20%, we have a pizza party. If we get to 30%, we're doing this. If we get to 40%, we're doing this, which was a great way to start. Then we found often then within practice teams, a little bit of competition can be fun. No one wants to be the outlier. No one wants to be the person with the most recalls that aren't actioned or investigations that aren't given or the lowest this or the biggest this. That needs trust within a team though. to say, are we happy to share that as a team? But then even across our nursing team, we've had practices that have incentives for delivering certain bits of care based on that data. But to be really honest, I think in everyone I've spoken to, the gamification has been good when they could name a patient that it changed their life or a practitioner that it changed their life. This isn't a game. And I know gamification's fun, but the number of practices that we can talk to that said, we found the patients who would do their healthy heart checks and within 3 days they were in being seeing someone because we found something. That means more than any game. It's actually changing someone's life. And often they're patients that have been coming to the practice for a long time, Sachin, because they're the ones you become comfortable with. They might forget this. New patient used to go through a list of things in your head, the ones who've been around for the longest. And then so you can actually then say, oh, well, this is this or this is this. And yeah, I think they're the stories, hey, that I love hearing and mean the most to me. It's that where you actually make a real difference in someone's life, but it's not a game. It's someone's life. So yeah, finding that balance is hard. You don't want it all to be super intense though too. You need to have the good wins along the way. I mean, I think that's why I said at the start, you've got to celebrate the wins just as much as the things you've got to focus in on, because people will buy in more to positive outcomes than big, scary, negative stuff.
Absolutely. So I think there's 2 points, one you said earlier and one now, that I think are worth I'll share my insights on. So the first one is that when you're trying to affect change, which is what we're really talking about within the practice, using data as a way of measuring and assessing what to focus on, but then also measuring improvement. The power of story is very, very important. We've worked with people in Project X who may have tripled, quadrupled, quintupled their chronic disease work, but they've centered a lot of that work around actual impactful stories, around real life patients and their families. And I think that is super important. The second part, I think that we talked about the triangle earlier, the data, the context and leadership. And one of the risks with all the payroll tax nonsense that's gone on in recent times is that some people step away from this collaborative approach with their GP team. And I think that's a really big mistake because yes, we are separate businesses, but businesses can safely and very usefully collaborate together in joint interests and in serving the patients. And so I think it's just really important to emphasize to people not to step away from that collaborative approach with the GPs. Well, have you got any comments on that?
I got in trouble with a certain doomsday around this stuff when I said, at what point do we lose the spirit of general practice? At what point do we lose that spirit of collaboration? And as a team, I was a practice manager, but I cared about my patients, and our doctors in our practice and our nurses all cared about our patients, but they needed to have a break. They needed to go off for a week and someone needed to check path for that week. I know it's a really simple example, but something's going to come through and it's super important for the patient. You know what? That doctor getting a break is just as important because they're going to burn out. And how do we collaborate and how do we share knowledge and insights? And as I sort of said before, the thing that's got me most so excited at the moment is the whole practice working on their CPD and QI around something together that they share and go on a learning together to make something amazing that changes the lives of their patients. The point we stop doing that and we just get locked in our little rooms, I'd say you're going to lose the spirit of general practice. And I know it's not a good payroll tax answer, but that spirit is pretty awesome. I think it's why a lot of people get involved. And I just think it'd be such a shame to lose that. I think that would just be losing some of what makes it so special about what we do and why you come to work and do the hard things every day. So yeah, I think that's a really sound call out. The spirit of what we do needs to be there, because otherwise what does it become? I'm not something that I want to work in or be part of. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that. So yeah.
Let them come after us. The reality is good sound business is about collaborative working, any type of business, even the caring business. And then if we just think of ourselves, I don't know about you, but when my accountant and my lawyer and other professionals and the mortgage broker or whatever, they talk to each other and collaborate while I'm not there, it feels wonderful. As a patient, when the people in your care team together collaborate over your care and you're not there, it feels great because people are thinking of you when you're not even there. And so that's the thing to remember when we're thinking of this data-driven improvement activities in the context of concerns about payroll tax. There's no problem with collaborating over care and making things better for patients. I think it's just really important.
Mate, we use a little barometer internally. So love my gran. She's one of the most, you've heard me speak about her before. But she had Alzheimer's. So towards the end, she needed collaboration to make sure we all lived an hour away, at least from her. There was a lot of people involved in that world. And my barometer when we look at something and we try to build something or we're going to do something in Cubiko is, would it make a difference for her? Like, would it? Some people will challenge me and say, what does bulk billing rate make a difference to her? I said, yeah, but if the practices are closed and there was 2 doctors she trusted, it would have made a huge difference to her. And so never be afraid to call that out and give your why and own your why, because people will respect that and people will see the truth in your why. And if you don't have a truthful why, they'll also pretty quickly see through that it's not a truthful why. But I tell you, every good leader I've had in my life has been someone who had a why that I wanted to get behind. And so that's what makes me scared with all this talk of payroll tax and losing that collaboration in general practice is you lose that why. and you'll lose good leaders and you'll lose the impact that we can make. So don't be afraid of that. Own that. Well, that's super special.
Absolutely. Certainly the people I've seen and worked with who've had the most success in terms of building the practice they want, they've maintained and continue to maintain great collaborative working relationships with all the clinicians. And so, I strongly emphasize that is of utmost important.
But just be practical and be sensible and follow the best advice, not the loudest advice, not the scariest advice. Follow the best advice that makes sense to your practice, not to the practice that's owned up the road in a different structure with a different this, with a different that, not the free template you got off someone on Facebook. Actually do the work. And I find, and I'm sure you find this, Sachin, that many owners I speak to who have been through this journey and gone through the work to get things super good, relax, because they know it's good and they understand it, and they're not operating from fear, but they're operating from, well, I've been through this and I've had this conversation. I understand what this is. I understand why this clause is now important and why I never take this clause out, because I now get the bigger picture and how it all fits together, rather than just using a template that someone said was fine. Yay, done. There's the people, you still don't understand it, so you're kind of flying a little bit blind.
Chris, who on earth would take a template from a Facebook group and then use it as a contract for?
I know nothing.
So I think as we're coming towards the end of this, there's probably something super useful for our audience that I just want to ask. There's probably two groups here, and it's probably equally applicable to both. There's probably one group here who invested in a subscription with Cubiko, and then you've just talked about some stuff, and they're sitting here like, I didn't know about any of that. And I suspect there's lots of those people, because most of us with some type of subscription don't actually squeeze all we can out of it. So for that group, what should they do? Like, how do they sink their teeth into all the juicy goodness you just shared?
Yeah, so a few different things. So it surprised me the number of people who will either not read our newsletter, or when they log into Cubiko, just press next. But when you log in, we tell you everything that's new. So even if you read 2 bits of it, at least see what's new and what's happening. If you love a newsletter, have a read of our newsletter. If you love our socials or our Facebook group, join our Facebook group, because we put everything in there. You choose the way you consume information your best, and you'll probably find that we've got a way that we're sending that information out. You might not have gelled with it yet, but if you prefer Facebook, we've got Facebook. If you prefer email, we've got email. If you prefer in product, we've got in product. If you prefer webinars, every month we do a what's new in Cubiko. So find the one that works for you and engage on that one. But then if you're just super time poor as a practice owner, I'm probably talking more to practice owners here, some of the practices that have put like a Cubiko czar in their practice, and often they might have someone who's like the MBS expert or the BP expert, the Cubiko expert, and it's their job to just go, oh, yeah, Chris's announcement 3 weeks ago about influenza vaccinations means something to our practice. But his announcement about right back 2 weeks ago means something. So I'm going to select that up, because they'll know your practice and your business better than anyone else. Could be a super, super powerful thing. One of the other cool things we did is a lot of practices might on their monthly like leadership team meeting actually just put 5 minutes aside to say, what's new? Because it might not mean anything to you in your role, but if you knew that you read the newsletter and you say, oh, did you see they added this the other week? See they added care prompts? Your nurse might be like, oh, our nurse is going to be looking for a way to do that. Like, it's collaboration, and they all become quality improvements, which you go on your quality improvement register, which you need for accreditation. So yeah, I guess it's a bit of we need some effort from you guys to know that what we're doing, but we're trying to find that we find as most channels. So pop-ups in product, Facebook groups, emails, webinars, social media. We sort of send out a number of different ways now, and we're working harder and harder to help everyone understand.
Cool. We might include a link to maybe a page of yours that people can go to then find their best way.
So when you go to Cubiko, it's on the right-hand side. What's new? So it's there for you.
Okay, and then we'll include in the show notes a link to your What's New on Cubiko page. And then separate to that, there's a group here who probably haven't sort of dipped their toe in the world of Cubiko or any other data tool yet. And if they were keen to pursue sort of their interest in that, what's the best way to go about that?
So probably add another little group to that group. It's people who look at us, as I said, we're 5 years old. And it amazes me, some people who looked at us 4 years ago and think we're exactly the same now as what we were 4 years ago. Look how much I've aged in 5 years, Sachin. I've aged, our products got so much better, and we do so much more. So for a lot of people, it's actually being able to say, oh yeah, I looked at that at a conference 5 years ago, but what does it do for me now? And it's reaching out and engaging with us. And one of the things I love about our team is nearly everyone who's bought a copy of Cubiko has done it for having a chat to a member of our team. Because I think it goes back to something we said at the very start, that your practice is different to your other practice. And if I just was to make a whole marketing collateral and said, here's the 10 features, you'd be like, oh, that's good, but I actually really want to know about features 7 and 12. You know what I mean? So booking a chat with a member of our team, we love it when you come along and say, Chris, we're 100% private billing. So I don't need to know about XXX, but I want to know about average gap and this and this and this. Or even better, Chris, I'm 100% private billing. What should I be looking at? what should I be monitoring? And our team are awesome at just showing you what matters to you. So some of our best demos we've done have been when you've got the practice manager, maybe the principal GP or the principal nurse for a demo, because the ideas fire about. So that's what we love doing there. And the other thing is that your business has probably changed. So please feel free to reach out again. But I would say, as much as I can talk now, booking one of those one-on-one chats at our website with a real person who's based here in Brizzy, who will just talk you through what we do and have Cubiko open and can answer your questions. I want you to be happy with what you've got. And by doing that, you can actually see it in action and be like, oh, cool, it's got this, or it doesn't have this spell. This is what I needed. Or sometimes the best thing we can do is people will come with a question about why and think the answer is this, but actually there's a deeper question. Our diaries are 100% full. I'm like, no, you don't need my product to tell you they're 100% full. But the deep question is, what can you do to free them up or earn more revenue with already 100% full diaries? That's the bit that's sort of super exciting.
See. Well, Chris, that's been really insightful. We'll make sure the links that Chris talked about are in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Let's do it again. Thanks so much, Sachin. See you later.
Cheers. Bye from me.